Hello, I'm Emily, and I'm 36 years old. I'm a mother to a 12-year-old girl, and recently, I finally got to stand up for her against my evil mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law had to pay the ultimate price for it. My husband Robert and I got married right after we graduated from college, but we waited until we were financially stable enough to actually have a child. Now, Robert also has an older brother, Thomas, who got married around the same time as us. Thomas had a son, Jake, about a year before I had my daughter, Sophie. Since Jake was the first grandbaby to Robert's mom, Sandra, he got pampered a lot, especially in the first year of his life. I saw the way that Sandra absolutely coddled and spoiled the ever-loving crap out of him, and I was actually kind of excited to have a child after that. I had no parents, considering they both passed away while I was in college, so I felt happy knowing that my child would have at least one grandmother who would spoil her senseless. Except that never happened. Sandra treated Sophie very differently, and it started right at birth. When Jake was born, Sandra visited him every day in the hospital. But with Sophie, she saw her the day she was born and then never visited again. She barely paid Sophie any attention at all, like there were no gifts. Heck, there was never even a question about her well-being. Meanwhile, Jake still received all of her love and affection. Robert and I were very hurt about her behavior, but we just chalked it up to her plain favoritism with the first grandchild. But then, as the years passed, things only got so much worse because of their close ages. Jake and Sophie would spend a lot of time together, especially when Sandra would offer to babysit both of them to give the parents some time off. Jake and Sophie would do the same activities and play the same games, yet Sandra would go on praising Jake while she ignored Sophie, or she would downplay whatever Sophie did because it was never as good as Jake's. It used to boil my blood whenever I'd see Sophie run to Sandra to show her something she made or learned, and Sandra would just brush her off. But if Jake simply walked into the room, Sandra would be waxing poetry about his greatness. Now, Robert and I made sure to make Sophie feel loved and appreciated, of course. In fact, we even went above and beyond to make sure that she was happy, but this went on for 12 years. I never confronted Sandra because I always managed to make Sophie feel better, and I stopped letting Sophie be around Sandra too much. That didn't stop Sandra from still being critical of Sophie, but Robert usually handled the situation and would tell Sandra to be nicer. Anyway, everything came to a head on Sandra's birthday. She invited the entire family over to her place for lunch. As a gift, Sophie made Sandra a painting of the two of them in the park, playing on the swings. That day was the only day that the two of them spent time together without anyone else, and it clearly had a special place in Sophie's heart. I knew that Sophie would be devastated if Sandra did not appreciate it, but most of all, I knew that I'd lose my head if Sandra didn't. Sandra greeted us at the door when we arrived. "Happy birthday, Sandra." "Ah, thanks. How are you guys doing?" "Everything's going great. How are you doing?" "I couldn't be happier. My family's here and we're celebrating me." "Speaking of celebrating you, Sophie made you something. Did you know?" "Yes, Grandma," Sophie said. "It's not very pretty or anything, darling. It's gorgeous. Just give it to Grandma. I'm sure she'll appreciate it." "Yeah, show me." "Here you go. Happy birthday, Grandma." "Oh, it's a painting. You know, Jake just made me a painting too, and let me tell you, that boy is great with his colors." "Okay, but do you like Sophie's painting for you?" "Yes, I mean, it's quite okay. I wouldn't say it was worth putting in the fridge because if I did that, then Sophie would be put to shame when anyone saw Jake's." "Okay, that's enough. Sophie, go play with Jake. We need to talk to Grandma." "Yes, Dad. Why are you always so mean to Sophie, Sandra?" "I'm not being mean to her. I didn't say a mean word against her painting at all, even though I had so many things to critique about it. Why are you constantly comparing her to Jake? She's done nothing but try her hardest to impress you, and all you do is make her feel like crap for it. I'm not comparing anyone to anyone. All I'm doing is stating facts, and the fact is that Jake is better than Sophie at most things. Look, I can't tell you what opinions to have, but the least you could do is keep them to yourself. Every time you compare Sophie to Jake, she feels so sad and upset with herself. If you keep glorifying her every deed, she's never going to learn. She can always deal with some criticism, and in fact, learning to deal with criticism is a very important life lesson. Sure, but I never see you criticize anything that Jake does. That's so unfair to Sophie. Life's unfair. Get used to it. You know what? Since you're so hell-bent on comparing Sophie and Jake together, I simply won't let you meet Sophie. She doesn't deserve a grandmother who doesn't love her and constantly makes her feel bad about herself. You can't stop me from seeing my grandchild's son. Say something. No, Mom, Emily's right. You need to apologize and show us that you're willing to treat your grandchildren equally, and only then we'll let you see Sophie. Sandra couldn't believe that we were standing up to her. We called Sophie back to us, and we left the party shortly after that. We did get a few texts from some family members telling us that we were jerks for leaving so soon and causing a scene, but none of them saw how crumpled Sophie's face looked when Sandra dismissed her painting altogether and compared it to Jake's. Robert and I ignored all the texts we got about us leaving, and eventually, people stopped bothering us. About a week and a half after Sandra's birthday, Sandra finally called me. I was tempted to not answer the call, but decided to be the bigger person and give her a chance. Hello, Emily. Hi, Sandra. What's going on? Oh, nothing. Just wanted to call and see if you were still mad at me. I wouldn't say that I'm mad, but I'm upset with you. Look, I've been giving it some thought, and I realized that I may just have been a tad bit mean to Sophie. A tad bit. You were a lot mean to the point where Sophie simply doesn't do anything on her own because she's so worried about how bad she is. Oh my, that is not what I wanted to do at all. Yeah, so maybe you owe her an apology more than me. I agree. Anyway, I was only calling you because I had an idea of how I could make it up to her. Oh really, how? Well, I was thinking of taking Jake on a ski trip in the first week of next month. I've already rented a lodge, and we'll be going by car, so there's plenty of room for Sophie if she wants to join in. You want to take her on a trip? Just her? Well, I figured it would be a great way for us to bond and for me to make amends for how rudely I treated her. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? You wanted me to make amends, and when I'm trying, you have an issue with it. Look, in our presence itself, you treat her so badly. Who's to say that you won't treat her the same or even worse when Robert and I aren't around? I'm not saying that I don't trust you or that I'm worried that if you do or say something unintentionally mean, no one is going to be there to comfort Sophie. I promise you that I won't let anything happen to Sophie. I swear that I really want to use this trip as a way for me to make up to Sophie. I'll talk to Robert about this and I'll get back to you by the end of the week if that's okay. Yes, of course. Take all the time you need. I was definitely leaning towards not letting Sophie go, but I knew that was not a decision I could make on my own. So that evening, Robert and I discussed how we felt about letting Sophie go. On one hand, we knew what Sandra had been like for years, and the chances of her treating Sophie any differently were slim to none. But at the same time, this was the first time that Sandra made an effort to actually bond with Sophie. Robert and I didn't want to take away Sophie's only chance to bond with Sandra. We knew that Sophie still loved her grandma, and we didn't want her to think that we weren't going to let her do certain things just because Sandra was involved. We also talked to Sophie and asked her how she would feel about going on a trip with Sandra and Jake, and Sophie was very excited about it. So it was decided that she would go. Sandra seemed very happy that we decided to let Sophie go with her. She promised us that she would take good care of Sophie, but something in my gut told me otherwise. So before Sophie left, I gave her an old phone of mine and told her to hide it from Grandma at all costs. I told her to keep it on her at all times and to only use it when she absolutely needed to call either me or her dad. I prayed that she would not have to use the phone, but of course, things did not go that way. Just a day after she left, I got a call from Sophie. I answered the phone, hoping that Sophie just missed me and that was the reason for her call. Mom, Sophie, sweetie, how's my baby doing? Are you having fun? Mom, I'm so scared. What? What's wrong, honey? Why are you crying? It's so cold. I want to come home. Okay, honey. Where's Grandma? Are you lost? See if you could find a ranger, and they can guide you back to your lodge. But I'm standing in front of the lodge. I'm so scared and cold and hungry, Mom. Please, please come get me. What? Okay, wait, honey. I need you to calm down and tell me what happened. I don't know what happened. After all of us came back from skiing, Grandma got mad at me and stole all my warm clothes and locked me out of the lodge. I've been asking her to let me in for so long, but she isn't listening. What? Why would she do that? Hold on, sweetie, your dad's going to get you some help. Why don't you tell me why Grandma was mad? Are you and Dad going to come and pick me up? Of course, sweetie, but it will take us a while to get there. In the meantime, we'll have someone else take you to a safe place and give you something warm to wear and probably even hot chocolate, okay? Please make it fast, it's so cold. I know, sweetie. Now tell me why Grandma got mad. Well, Jake and I were both skiing for the first time, and Jake was struggling to keep his balance while I could do it really well. You could, sweetie? That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom, but it really wasn't that hard. Hush, you don't have to be so humble about it either. Okay, but Jake started crying after seeing me do well, and after our instructor kept praising me, Grandma got mad at me after that, and she didn't talk to me until we got home, and then she just threw me out. What? I'm going to give that woman a piece of my mind. Do me a favor, sweetie, and do not tell your grandma that I'm coming there, okay? Yes, Mom. Sweetie, your dad's saying that there's a ranger approaching you right now. Can you see him? I see someone approaching me. Ask him what his name is and ask him what his favorite drink is. If he says anything else but Sam and hot chocolate, ignore him, okay? Yes, Mom. Okay, his name is Sam, and he loves hot chocolate. Should I go with him? Yes, sweetie. Take care and keep me updated, okay? Yes, Mom. My heart was racing as soon as Sophie ended the call. How could Sandra do that to a child? I was 100% sure that Sandra would not even care to look for Sophie because she'd be too wrapped up in taking care of Jake. Robert and I grabbed our warm coats and jackets and made the 3-hour drive to where they were staying. The entire drive there, the only thing we were focused on was making sure that our little girl was safe. I was still waiting for a call from Sandra to at least tell me what happened, but I got nothing. Sophie kept texting me every 15 minutes to let me know that she was fine. Getting those messages eased Robert's and my worries, but that only gave rise to another emotion, anger. We were furious at Sandra for putting our daughter's life at risk in that manner. If I hadn't sent Sophie with the phone, what were the odds that she'd be able to find a ranger herself? I was willing to bet that they were very slim. By the time Robert and I reached it, it was starting to get dark. I told Robert to find Sophie and wait in the car for me while I dealt with Sandra. As I approached Sandra's lodge, I heard Sandra's loud laughter, and that only made my blood boil even more. I knocked on the door and waited for her to open it. Sandra looked very surprised to see me there. Emily, what are you doing here? Where's Sophie? Oh, she's just out and about somewhere. You mean you don't know where she is? You were supposed to be looking after her. I sent her here in your care. Look, nothing bad ever happens around here, and I'm sure she's safe. Is this your way of making things up with Sophie? You just leave her alone to wander in a place that's cold and unknown to her? Why don't I call a ranger, and I'm sure they'll know about where she is. Yeah, there's no need for that. We're here because Sophie is at one of the ranger's cabins, so she's safe, and you just came out here to yell at me. You didn't even seem bothered. Are you nuts? My child could have gotten hurt, and you wouldn't have known. Do you love Jake so much that you were willing to put Sophie's life in danger? What are you talking about? Sophie told me about what happened when you were skiing today. You're the one that pampered Jake so much that he can't stand it when he can't be perfect at something. You beat that value into Sophie, but refused to do it with Jake. You clearly have a favorite, and while I have no problem with that, I do want to know why you were willing to let my daughter freeze out here in the cold because Jake threw a fit about not being able to ski as well as Sophie. That was not the case at all. Do not even try to lie to me. I spoke to your skiing instructor, and he corroborated Sophie's story. Fine, if you must know, I hate that Sophie looks like the spitting image of you. Excuse me, I do not like you one bit, and I hate that my only granddaughter looks nothing like my son. Jake looks exactly like his dad, and that is why I treat him so well. So you treat my daughter like crap because of the way she looks, which is something she had no control over? She deserves it anyway. The way she was gloating today was unacceptable. I had to teach her a lesson. You know, if I keep talking to you, I'm afraid that I'm going to get violent. I will deal with this in another way. I don't want you near my family ever again. Sandra didn't even bother following me as I went towards the car where Robert and Sophie were, and the thought that Sandra didn't even take anything I said seriously made me angrier. After I made sure that Sophie was not harmed in any way, Robert and I took her out for dinner, and we talked to her to make sure that she wasn't traumatized in any way. Thankfully, the rangers that kept her company were really sweet and distracted her enough to not think about what Sandra had done to her. That night, after we put Sophie to bed, Robert and I decided that we were going to speak to a lawyer and figure out if we could press charges against Sandra for what she did. Robert and I spent the next week gathering information, and then we decided to file a case against Sandra for child neglect and ask for her grandparents' rights to be taken away. It didn't take long for Sandra to call me and yell at me for filing a case against her. "What did you do? You filed a case against me." "Hello, Sandra. I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Quit the sarcasm and answer me right this second. I told you that I was going to deal with you another way. You filed a case against me for child neglect, and you're asking for my grandparents' rights to be stripped away. I see nothing wrong with that. You didn't do anything wrong. You endangered my daughter because of your childish mentality. You bullied her for years only because she looks like me. It's okay to hate me, but to bully a child, that's unacceptable. You're only going to be paying the price for what you did. I didn't think it was this bad. You could have talked to me about this instead of charging me with a crime. I did try to talk to you, Sandra, and when I finally thought that you listened to me, you went ahead and put my daughter's life at risk. I don't think that any more talking would have changed the way you behaved towards Sophie. Fine, charge me with whatever you want. You can't prove a single thing. Kids make things up, so there's no way to prove whatever Sophie says. You know that the lodge you rented had many security cameras around it, right? Not to mention we have the rangers to confirm our story and many witnesses. You're going to go down. I'm sorry, please. I promise I'll be better. I doubt that. Why don't you use this time to think about how to be a better person and why what you did was wrong? I'll see you in court. Nothing made me feel better than hearing Sandra beg me to go easy on her and drop the charges, but dropping the charges would not only tell Sandra that I would let these kinds of behavior go, but it would also tell my daughter that I wasn't there for her, and I would never send either of those messages. Over the next few weeks, I went to court a lot. The jury and the judge looked appalled when they heard what Sandra had done to Sophie. It's safe to say that Sandra had a very hard time defending herself because she didn't actually cause any harm to Sophie. She was charged with a pretty heavy fine and was given a restraining order from my family. She was also stripped of her grandparent rights. It was so satisfying to watch Sandra break down when she heard her verdict. I don't know why she was sobbing so much when she had no issue making my daughter feel the brunt of her anger. Nobody in the courtroom felt an ounce of pity for her, and that, in my book, was a win. Sandra did call us again after the hearing, but Robert told her to stay away from us for good. She once again cried and begged us to let her make things right with Sophie again. But why would we let her do that again when she showed us what making things right was according to her? Not to mention, my daughter absolutely hates Sandra and doesn't want anything to do with her now. Don't you worry about my daughter's newfound talent. After everything with Sandra was wrapped up, Robert and I took Sophie to another place where she could ski as much as she wanted, and boy, did she do that. The three of us remained in the snow all day, and I had to practically drag Sophie back into our cabin after the sun began to set. I'm just glad that that one experience with Sandra did not ruin something this good for Sophie. Things are slowly starting to get better at home, though. Jake's dad, Thomas, called us to apologize for what happened and has put Jake through therapy so he can nip whatever bad habit that Sandra has instilled in him. It's safe to say that everyone in Robert's family has gone low to no contact with Sandra. I'm excited to see where life takes us from here on. One thing's for certain, I am never letting anyone ever make my daughter feel like she's lesser than anyone else.